Left-handed brings trouble, she used to say, and hit me with a ruler if I took a spoon with the wrong hand. Then, during her attack, I performed CPR with my left hand alone. And she survived. I never understood why they forced me to relearn everything. From the moment I could hold anything, my left hand felt natural, comfortable, like it belonged to me in a way my right never did. But that comfort meant nothing in our house. My grandmother moved in with us when I was 5. She was this stern woman with silver hair always pulled back tight and eyes that seemed to see sin in everything. The first week she lived with us, she caught me coloring with my left hand. The way she reacted, you would have thought I was setting the house on fire. She grabbed that ruler she always kept in her apron pocket and smacked my knuckles hard enough to make me drop the crayon. The pain shot up my arm, but what hurt more was the look of disgust on her face. She told me left-handed people were marked by the devil, that it was unnatural, wrong. My mom stood in the doorway watching, saying nothing. That became my life for the next 13 years. Every meal was a battle. Every time I reached for something with my left hand, there was that ruler waiting. My knuckles were constantly bruised, and I learned to hide my hands under the table whenever she was around. The worst part was how she would watch me like a hawk, waiting for me to slip up. School became torture too. Writing with my right hand felt like trying to draw with my foot. My letters were shaky, uneven, barely readable. Teachers would look at my homework with confusion, wondering how a kid could write so poorly. I never told them why. What was I supposed to say? That my grandmother thought I was cursed? The other kids started noticing too. They would see me struggling with simple tasks that should have been easy. Cutting paper with scissors designed for right-handed people left jagged edges. Playing sports was awkward because I had to consciously think about which hand to use for everything. I developed this constant anxiety about being watched, about making mistakes. My mom never intervened. Looking back, I think she was scared of my grandmother too. The old woman had this way of making everyone in the house feel like they were walking on eggshells. She had opinions about everything, and her word was law. If she said I was cursed, then that was just how things were. By the time I was in high school, I had mostly given up fighting it. My left hand felt clumsy from disuse, while my right hand never quite felt right either. I was caught between two worlds, not really comfortable with either. The constant correction had left me feeling broken somehow, like there was something fundamentally wrong with me that everyone could see. College was the first time I felt some freedom. Being away from home meant I could use whichever hand felt natural without someone watching my every move. But 18 years of conditioning is hard to break. I still found myself hesitating, looking around to see if anyone was watching before I picked up a pen or fork. I studied hard, threw myself into my coursework. It felt good to excel at something, to prove that whatever was supposedly wrong with me didn't affect my mind. But I never forgot those years of being told I was cursed. The words had burrowed deep into my sense of self. After graduation, I moved back home to save money while I figured out my next steps. Being back in that house with my grandmother was like stepping back in time. She was older now, more frail, but her eyes were just as sharp and judgmental. She still made comments about my left hand whenever she caught me using it, though she no longer had the energy to chase me around with a ruler. Update 1. The day everything changed started like any other. I had been living back home for about 6 months, and the routine had become familiar again. My grandmother spent most of her time in her chair by the window, watching the neighborhood and commenting on everything she saw. She had developed this habit of calling out observations about the neighbors, their visitors, their yard work, as if providing commentary on a show only she was watching. That Tuesday afternoon, I was in the kitchen making lunch for both of us. She had been quieter than usual that morning, which should have been a warning sign, but I was just grateful for the peace. I was cutting vegetables for sandwiches when I heard this strange sound from the living room. It wasn't quite a gasp, not quite a groan. Something between the two that made the hair on my arms stand up. I set down the knife and walked to the doorway. My grandmother was still in her chair, but something was wrong. Her face had gone pale, almost gray, and she was pressing one hand against her chest. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not judgment, but something that looked almost like fear. She tried to say something, but the words came out as a whisper I couldn't understand. Then her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward in the chair. The next few seconds felt like they lasted forever. I stood there frozen, watching her body go limp, trying to process what was happening. This woman who had been such a force in my life, who had seemed invincible in her certainty and harshness, suddenly looked small and fragile. Then training kicked in. I had taken a CPR class in college, one of those requirements everyone complains about but takes anyway. I never thought I would actually need it, especially not like this. I ran to her chair and felt for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was already starting to look blue around the edges. Getting her out of the chair and onto the floor was harder than I expected. She was heavier than she looked, and her body was completely limp weight. I had to half carry, half drag her to the living room carpet, trying to be gentle, but knowing that speed mattered more than comfort right now. I positioned her head back, tilted her chin up, and started chest compressions. My hands locked together, pressing down hard on her sternum. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm came back to me from that class, the instructor's voice in my head counting out loud. 15 compressions, then 2 breaths. Her ribs felt fragile under my hands. I was afraid of breaking something, but I knew that broken ribs were better than death. Push hard, push fast, don't stop. The mantra repeated in my head as I worked. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two, she gasped. A harsh, rattling sound that was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, but alive. She was breathing on her own again. I sat back on my heels, my hands shaking from adrenaline. My whole body was trembling, and I realized I was crying. The woman who had made my childhood miserable was alive because of me. Because of the hands she had spent years telling me were cursed. The paramedics arrived about 10 minutes later. Someone must have called them, though I don't remember doing it. Maybe a neighbor heard the commotion. They took over, checking her vitals, loading her onto a stretcher. Professional and efficient in a way that made my amateur efforts seem clumsy by comparison. As they wheeled her out to the ambulance, she caught my eye. For just a moment, her expression softened. She didn't say anything, couldn't with the oxygen mask over her face, but something passed between us. An acknowledgement, maybe, or just recognition that everything had changed. Update 2. The hospital waiting room became my second home for the next 3 days. The doctors told us she had suffered a massive heart attack, the kind that kills most people her age. The fact that she survived it all was remarkable, they said. The quick response had made all the difference. My mom arrived that first evening, having driven straight from her conference 2 states away. She looked exhausted and scared, older somehow than when I had seen her just a few days before. We sat together in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, not saying much, just watching the clock and waiting for updates. The second day brought better news. My grandmother was stable, conscious, and asking for us. The nurse warned us that she was still very weak and might be confused, but she was out of immediate danger. When we walked into her room, I hardly recognized her. She looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and wires. The woman who had seemed so powerful, so certain about everything, looked fragile and human. Her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back tight, and without her usual stern expression, her face looked softer, almost kind. She was awake when we entered, her eyes tracking our movement. When she saw me, something shifted in her expression. Not the judgment I was used to, but something I couldn't quite identify. She gestured weakly for me to come closer. I approached the bed cautiously, unsure what to expect. She had never been physically affectionate, never showed much emotion beyond disapproval. But when I got close enough, she reached out and took my left hand in both of hers. Her grip was weak, but deliberate. She turned my hand over, examining it like she was seeing it for the first time. Her fingers traced over my knuckles, the same knuckles she had hit with that ruler so many years ago. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. She looked up at me then, and I saw tears in her eyes. This woman who I had never seen cry, who had seemed incapable of vulnerability, was crying while holding the hand she had spent years trying to train out of me. That night, after visiting hours ended, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moment, about the feel of her hands on mine. It was the first time she had touched me with anything resembling tenderness. The first time she had looked at my left hand without disgust. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. My grandmother's neighbor, an elderly man who lived next door, came to the hospital. He had been the one to call the paramedics, he told us. He had heard the commotion and seen the ambulance through his window. But that wasn't why he came. He wanted to tell us something about my grandmother, something he thought we should know. He had known her for over 20 years, he said, since she first moved to the neighborhood. They had become friends, the kind of neighbors who looked out for each other. What he told us changed everything I thought I knew about her. My grandmother had been left-handed too. Not just left-handed, but forced to change as a child in a way that made my own experience look gentle by comparison. Her father had tied her left hand behind her back for months, beaten her when she used it, told her she was evil and wrong. She had spent her entire adult life trying to prove she wasn't cursed, trying to be the perfect right-handed person her father had demanded. And when I came along, displaying the same trait that had brought her so much pain, she had done to me what had been done to her. The neighbor explained that she had talked about it sometimes, late at night when they sat on their porches. She knew it was wrong, he said, but she was terrified that if she didn't fix me, I would suffer the way she had. In her mind, she was protecting me from a world that would punish me for being different. It was twisted logic, born from decades of her own pain, but it was logic nonetheless. She wasn't evil, just broken in a way that had made her break me too. Final update. My grandmother came home from the hospital a week later, but she was different. Not just physically weaker, though that was obvious, but fundamentally changed in some way I couldn't quite define. She moved more slowly, spoke more softly, and that constant edge of judgment seemed to have dulled. The first few days were awkward. We were both navigating new territory, trying to figure out how to be around each other without the familiar dynamic of her disapproval and my defensive reactions. She spent most of her time resting, and I found myself checking on her more often than necessary, still scared that I might lose her just when things were starting to change. One afternoon, about a week after she came home, I was making tea in the kitchen when she appeared in the doorway. She was moving slowly but steadily, no longer needing the walker the hospital had sent home with her. She watched me for a moment as I reached for cups with my left hand, an automatic gesture I didn't even think about anymore. Instead of the sharp correction I had learned to expect, she just stood there. When I noticed her watching, I started to switch the cup to my right hand out of old habit. But she held up her own hand to stop me. She walked over to the counter and, without saying anything, picked up a spoon with her left hand. It was shaky, uncertain after decades of disuse, but deliberate. She stirred her tea left-handed for the first time in probably 60 years, and I watched this small act of rebellion with amazement. We sat at the kitchen table together, both of us using our left hands, both of us feeling clumsy and natural at the same time. It was the most peaceful moment we had ever shared. Over the following weeks, we developed a new routine. She was still recovering, still needed help with some things, but she was also rediscovering parts of herself she had buried long ago. She started drawing again, something she mentioned she had loved as a child before it was forbidden. Her left-handed sketches were rough and unpracticed, but there was joy in them that I had never seen in anything she did before. She never explicitly apologized for the years of punishment and harsh words. I don't think she knew how, and maybe I wasn't ready to hear it anyway. But her actions spoke louder than words could have. She threw away that ruler she had carried for so many years. She stopped correcting people when they used their non-dominant hands. She even bought me a set of left-handed scissors as a belated birthday gift. The real change came about a month after her heart attack. We were having dinner together, something that had always been a source of tension, when she suddenly stopped eating and looked at me. She told me that she had been wrong about everything, not just about left-handedness, but about the nature of curses and blessings. She said that watching me save her life with the very hand she had tried to suppress had shown her that what she thought was a curse had actually been a gift. She explained that my left hand had been faster, more coordinated, more natural during the CPR than my right hand ever could have been. All those years of forcing me to use my right hand had been preparing for that moment when only my left hand could do what needed to be done. It was the first time she had ever called me a blessing instead of a curse. The months that followed were the best of our relationship. We were both learning how to be ourselves, how to exist without the weight of shame and judgment that had defined us for so long. She started telling me stories about her own childhood, about the dreams she had given up, about the person she might have been if she had been allowed to be left-handed. I learned that she had wanted to be an artist, that she had shown real talent before it was beaten out of her. I learned that she had carried the pain of that suppression her entire life, and that hurting me had been her way of trying to spare me the same fate. Understanding didn't erase the damage that had been done, but it helped both of us start to heal. We were both wounded people who had wounded each other, but we were also both capable of change. She lived for 2 more years after her heart attack, 2 years that were fuller and more honest than all the decades that came before. She got to see me succeed in my career, got to see me use my natural abilities without shame. She got to be proud of me, and I got to be proud of her for having the courage to change. When she died, it was peaceful. I was holding her left hand, and she was holding mine. The last thing she said to me was that she was grateful her curse had become my blessing, that the hand she had tried so hard to suppress had given her more time to make things right. I still think about that day in the kitchen when everything changed. How quickly life can shift. How a moment of crisis can reveal truths that years of normal living keep hidden. My left hand, the source of so much pain and shame, had become the instrument of our reconciliation. These days, I use my left hand without thinking about it. I write, eat, work, and live as naturally as I was meant to from the beginning. But I never forget the lesson my grandmother taught me in her final years. Sometimes what we think are our greatest weaknesses turn out to be our most important strengths. Sometimes the things that make us different are exactly what the world needs from us. The ruler is gone, thrown away years ago. But I kept one thing from those difficult years. A drawing my grandmother made with her left hand during her recovery, shaky and imperfect, but full of life. It sits on my desk as a reminder that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be, and that even the deepest wounds can heal if we're brave enough to let them.